The snow fell upon London with a softness that belied the cruelty of the night's work. Berkeley Square lay hushed under a winter blanket, its grand white facades lit by warm golden lights and festooned with evergreen wreaths. The city glowed with festive spirit. Carolers in the distance, the faint jingle of a passing carriage, the tinkle of laughter drifting from merrily decorated drawing rooms. Yet at number 14, a house of impeccable reputation and old money dignity, joy had frozen instantly into horror. It was shortly after 10:30 when the first scream rang out. Mrs. Clara Redmayne, the elegant lady of the house, had been the one to discover the body. Guests at her annual Christmas Eve gathering, judges, donors, war heroes, widows with respectable fortunes, rushed toward the commotion like startled birds. The party had been one of the season's most anticipated affairs, known for its refined conversation, exquisite canapes, and the Redmaynes' famous tree. A 12-foot Norwegian spruce draped in silver ribbons and crystal ornaments that caught the firelight like stars. But now, the dazzling beauty of the ballroom contrasted sharply with the ghastly tableau at its center. Miles Redmayne, Clara's younger brother, and a man admired in society for his charm and generosity, lay motionless beneath the glittering tree. His face was pale, frozen into a look of mild surprise, as though death had come upon him too abruptly for fear or pain. Yet it was not his expression that commanded the room's horrified attention. It was the bright red Christmas stocking stuffed into his mouth. A stocking, small, knitted, childlike, its cheerful pattern of snowflakes and candy canes grotesquely at odds with the crime. Inspector Alec Furnival of Scotland Yard, though competent in his own right, felt the weight of the room's panic bearing down on him. The guests whispered in nervous clusters, their faces pale with shock, their glances flickering toward one another with suspicion as much as fear. A closed-circle tragedy. How fashionable society loathed and adored such circumstances. Clara Redmayne dabbed at her eyes with a lace handkerchief. "He was alive not half an hour ago," she whispered to Furnival. "He stepped away from the gathering to fetch a gift for the charity auction. He never returned." The inspector crouched beside the body. No sign of struggle, no footprints except his, no weapon, and this... He gestured to the stocking, gingerly removed, now sealed in a small glass evidence box. Someone intended a message. "A dreadful message," Clara murmured. "But who?" Before the inspector could answer, the butler cleared his throat discreetly from the doorway, looking uncharacteristically discomposed. "Inspector, there is a gentleman at the door requesting entry. He says he has been invited." Furnival stiffened. "Invited? At a time like this?" The butler nodded gravely. "He says he received a letter from Mrs. Redmayne herself, a formal request for his expertise." Clara looked bewildered. "From me? But I—" She stopped suddenly, her eyes widening. "I did send an invitation several days ago. I had hoped that he might be willing to grace our gathering. For the sake of my husband's company, he has been something of a valuable advisor. But I never imagined—" Furnival frowned. "Who is it?" A soft, unmistakably precise voice drifted into the room from behind the butler. "May I enter, Inspector? I fear my presence is timed most unfortunately, yet perhaps also most necessarily." Hercule Poirot stepped forward, immaculate despite the snow. His mustaches curled proudly, lacquered to perfection. His grey eyes sparkled with keen intelligence, observing every corner of the room before settling gently on the victim. He removed his hat, brushing the snowflakes from its brim with fastidious care, then bowed his head politely to Clara. "Madame Redmayne, you have my sincere condolences." Clara's composure finally broke. "Monsieur Poirot, I never intended that your visit be under such circumstances." Poirot gave a sympathetic incline of his head. "One rarely chooses the timing of tragedy, madame." Inspector Furnival, clearly torn between relief and wounded pride, addressed him curtly. Monsieur Poirot, you happen to arrive at a very delicate moment. Poirot lifted a gloved hand warmly. But of course, and I would not dream of interfering with the work of Scotland Yard. I am merely, how shall we say, an observer. Yet if I may be permitted to offer the eyes that see, Inspector, perhaps they may prove of use. Furnival hesitated, but Clara spoke quickly. Please, Inspector, if anyone can help us understand this horror, it is Monsieur Poirot. Forced by circumstance and the sharp awareness that public pressure would demand swift answers, Furnival gave a curt nod. Very well. You may observe. Poirot stepped closer to the body. The murmurs in the room quieted as though in reverence. His gaze swept from the stocking box to Miles Redmayne's carefully arranged position to the tree overhead, then to the floor, then, unexpectedly, to the guests. Poirot's voice was soft. Madame, you said your brother left the gathering to fetch a gift? Yes, a small wrapped parcel for tonight's charity auction. He had prepared it himself. And where is this parcel now? Clara looked around in sudden realization. I don't know. Poirot nodded slowly. Alors, a murder in a locked setting. A message delivered in the form of a stocking, an object symbolic, intimate. A missing parcel. A victim beloved, yet perhaps not by all. And among the guests, no doubt, secrets as abundant as the ornaments on your splendid tree. His eyes narrowed and a quiet seriousness fell over his features. This is not the work of a killer driven by momentary anger, Poirot concluded. No, this is the work of one who plans, who calculates, who uses symbolism to convey emotion, or mockery. Inspector Furnival sighed. You think the stocking means something? Poirot raised a brow. Everything means something, Inspector. It is merely a question of whether we have the patience to see. He stepped back, surveying the room once more. I will require, if you please, that the guests remain. A tragedy such as this, it does not leave without footprints, and those footprints, they are in the hearts and minds of those present. A cold draught whispered through the doorway as a clock chimed 11. Poirot's voice lowered. And somewhere in this house, Inspector, a killer waits with the calm of a man who believes he has played the perfect move in a game of Christmas murder. The guests were ushered into the Redmaynes' grand drawing room, an opulent chamber of velvet drapes, mahogany paneling, and gilt-framed portraits whose subjects gazed down with haughty disapproval at the unfolding scandal. The fire snapped and crackled, giving the illusion of warmth, though the atmosphere was as brittle as the frost outside. Inspector Furnival posted 2 constables at the doors to ensure no one slipped away under the cloak of shock. Poirot entered last, brushing a fleck of snow from his sleeve, his meticulous eyes scanning the room with the casual grace of a man who noticed everything and revealed nothing. A hush fell over the group. These were the high society guests of the Redmayne Christmas Eve gathering, polished, refined, and now trembling beneath the weight of suspicion. Poirot stepped forward. Mesdames et messieurs, forgive the intrusion, but in such a tragedy, we must together reconstruct the truth. The circle is small, the window of time smaller still. Among you, perhaps, the killer sits. A collective shiver ran through the room. Clara Redmayne spoke first, her voice tight but determined. Monsieur Poirot, please, anything you require. We want this nightmare resolved. Poirot inclined his head. Then let us begin with understanding who was present and, more importantly, what was felt. He surveyed the room, picking out the faces one by one. 1. Lady Honoria Tillingham. A tall, elegant woman in her late 50s, draped in silver satin and diamonds that glittered as fiercely as her eyes, known in society for her sharp tongue and sharper judgments. She stood with her hands clasped too tightly, her lips pressed thin. 2 Major Leonard Kerrigan, a distinguished war veteran with a stiff posture and a graying mustache. His medals shone brightly against his uniform. He had the air of a man who disliked disorder of any kind. His eyes avoided the body, but his jaw was clenched with an intensity almost too controlled. 3. Miss Elspeth Wren. A timid schoolmistress with the pale complexion of one unused to parties of this caliber. She wore a modest green dress and clutched her teacup as though it were the only solid thing in the world. Her gaze flickered nervously from guest to guest. 4. Mr. Julian Northcott. A suave, impeccably dressed financier known for his charm and rumored for his debts. He stood near the fireplace, hands in pockets, face smooth with an ease that seemed almost inappropriate. 5. Mrs. Dorothy Pemberton, round-faced, rosy-cheeked, and perpetually anxious. She fluttered like an overwound sparrow and seemed constantly on the verge of tears. 6. Simon Warwick, a young writer of middling success whose brooding demeanor and ink-stained fingers seemed oddly out of place at such an elite gathering. He stared at the floor, lost in some private storm of thought. Poirot clasped his hands behind his back and approached the center of the room. I ask first, did anyone see Monsieur Miles Redmayne after he left to fetch the parcel for the auction? Julian Northcott spoke smoothly. I saw him pass through the dining corridor, perhaps 20 minutes before the scream. Furnival scribbled in his notebook. And you were where, Mr. Northcott? Speaking with Lady Honoria in the side conservatory. Lady Honoria stiffened. Indeed, Mr. Northcott was lamenting the dire state of the financial markets, as he so often does. I hardly think that amounts to suspicious behavior. Poirot's mustache twitched with the faintest smile. Perhaps not, madame. Yet we gather details only. Judgment comes later. He turned to Major Kerrigan. And you, Major? Where were you during this time? By the mantel, near the charcuterie. I have a clear recollection. I was speaking with young Warwick here about his latest novel. Simon Warwick looked startled at being mentioned. Ah, yes, that's true. The Major was giving me his opinion. His critique, perhaps? Poirot asked gently. Warwick flushed. It was more of a lecture, honestly, about discipline and structure, and how writers today lack both. Major Kerrigan bristled. I simply offered guidance to a young man whose writing shows promise but lacks rigor. Poirot nodded mildly. And yet, neither of you recall seeing Monsieur Miles. No, both men answered. Poirot's gaze shifted to Miss Elspeth Wren, who nearly spilled her tea as he looked her way. I didn't see him at all, she stammered. I had stepped into the music room. The crowd felt overwhelming, so I wished for a moment alone. Poirot's expression softened. Understandable. And yet you were alone, mademoiselle. No one joined you. She shook her head quickly. No, I was entirely alone. Mrs. Pemberton dabbed her eyes. Poor Miles. He was such a sweet boy. I simply cannot imagine who would... Her voice cracked into a sob. Poirot stepped closer. Madame Pemberton, you were near the refreshments table, were you not? Yes, I was. I was sampling Clara's famous mince pies when the scream came. Alone? No. Miss Wren had gone by then, but I was speaking with Clara. Clara nodded. It's true. Dorothy was with me. Poirot made a small, thoughtful sound. He waited. Silence pressed down on the room. Finally, Poirot spoke. It is curious. 6 persons of society, each in their own corners, each without the sight of a young man passing through. And yet he passed somewhere, and he met someone. He paused. And that someone gave him death. Inspector Furnival stepped forward. We will need a full accounting from each of you, but before that, Monsieur Poirot, you mentioned symbolism. You believe the stocking means something. Poirot turned slowly toward the Christmas tree, a towering monument of beauty, and now, tragedy. The stocking, Poirot said, is not merely an object stuffed into the mouth. It is a statement. A Christmas stocking represents innocence, childhood, anticipation. To force such an object upon the victim is a gesture of cruelty, but also familiarity. Familiarity? Clara echoed. Poirot nodded. Such an intimate gesture suggests personal emotion, resentment, betrayal, revenge. But more importantly, he lifted a finger. It suggests a knowledge of Monsieur Redmayne's past. A ripple went through the guests. Poirot examined their faces with quiet intensity. Lady Honoria's eyes narrowed. Northcote shifted uncomfortably. Miss Wren swallowed hard. The Major stared straight ahead, rigid. Mrs. Pemberton trembled. Simon Warwick looked suddenly pale. Poirot clasped his hands. But before we plumb the depths of psychology, Inspector, we must also address something else. Furnival raised an eyebrow. What is that? Poirot gestured toward the door. To commit a murder so swiftly, so silently, within a gathering so close, the killer must have known that Monsieur Miles Redmayne would separate from the group. Clara inhaled sharply. You mean someone lured him? Poirot bowed his head. Precisely. A chill ran through the room. And so, Poirot concluded softly, we must ask, who among you would benefit from a private word with the late Monsieur Redmayne? The drawing-room grew still, as though the very air were waiting for Poirot's next words. Snow continued to drift against the windows, muffling the world outside. Inside, however, tension sharpened every breath, every glance. A murderer was among them, and Poirot had only just begun. He stepped forward with deliberate calm, the gleam of the fire reflected in his polished shoes. Inspector Furnival, I propose that we take the first steps of the investigation immediately, before memories fade or nerves rearrange themselves. Furnival, who already looked slightly overshadowed by the famous detective's presence, nevertheless nodded. Very well. We'll begin questioning each guest separately. Poirot lifted a hand delicately. If I may, I prefer a small deviation. Let us begin with brief impressions here in this room. The mind under shock reveals truths that vanish, when given time to think. His eyes swept across the assembly. Let us start with Lady Honoria Tillingham. She moved forward in a rustle of satin, chin high, pride protecting her like armor. I trust you do not suspect me, Monsieur Poirot, she said with thin amusement. I suspect everyone, Poirot replied pleasantly. It is the only efficient method. Lady Honoria sniffed. Very well. What do you wish to know? Poirot clasped his hands. Your relationship with Monsieur Miles Redmayne? A flicker crossed her sharp features. Too quick for most, but not for Poirot. I found him agreeable company. A charming young man, though inclined toward frivolity. Inspector Furnival frowned. Frivolity? She waved a jeweled hand. He enjoyed parties, admiration, attention, the sort of thing younger men seek. But he was harmless. Poirot tilted his head. Did he owe you money, madame? Her eyes widened, offended, startled, or something else entirely. Certainly not. I do not lend money, especially not to young men with uncertain spending habits. Poirot said nothing, merely studied her face with quiet intensity. She shifted, uncomfortable for the first time. Major, Poirot said gently, you are a man of discipline. You value order. I imagine tonight's events have shaken you most unpleasantly. Kerrigan straightened further. It is a disgraceful business, Monsieur Poirot. A murder, here, during a respectable gathering. It is intolerable. Yes, yet murder is rarely considerate, Poirot observed softly. Tell me, did you know the victim well? Not well. We met occasionally at charitable events. I found him courteous, if undirected. Poirot's brow quirked. Undirected. A young man with no clear purpose. No military service. No profession. One wonders how he spent his time. Did you resent him for it? Poirot asked quietly. Kerrigan stiffened, eyes flashing. Certainly not. But Poirot noticed the twitch in his jaw and filed it away. She approached timidly, hands twisting together. Mademoiselle Wren, Poirot said gently, you are frightened. She nodded. Yes, terribly. I've never witnessed anything like this. Few have, Poirot assured her. Tell me, did you know Monsieur Redmayne? Only in passing. I attended one of Clara's literary gatherings. Miles and I exchanged small talk. And what impression did he leave on you? Miss Wren hesitated. He was kind, but distracted, as though his mind were elsewhere. Poirot leaned in slightly. Did he ever seem troubled? She swallowed. Yes, once. He came into the music room at the previous charity event and looked as though he'd been crying. The room shifted with subtle surprise. Poirot nodded slowly. You did not tell anyone this? No, it felt too personal. I hardly knew him. Poirot's eyes glittered. But you noticed. That is important. With an elegant stride, Northcott approached, a smile ready on his lips, though Poirot noted the faint crack beneath it. Monsieur Northcott, Poirot said politely, you saw Miles Redmayne shortly before his death, did you not? Yes, he passed me in the corridor. You exchanged words? No, he appeared in a hurry. Poirot steepled his fingers. Did he look distressed, angry, anxious? Northcott shrugged lightly. I didn't examine him closely. The lighting was dim. Poirot smiled faintly. My friend Hastings once said, Poirot sees everything. You would be surprised, monsieur, at how much one can observe if one chooses to. Northcott's smile tightened. Perhaps, but I saw nothing unusual. Poirot's gaze dropped to the man's well-manicured hands. You are a financier, yes? I am. Financiers often know the finances of others. Northcott's eyes narrowed minutely. Do you suggest Miles owed me money? Poirot merely bowed. I suggest nothing. Not yet. She approached with fluttering steps, teary-eyed. Monsieur Poirot, I simply cannot comprehend this tragedy. Poirot offered a kindly nod. I understand, madame. But we must ask, did you know Miles well? Oh, yes. He often assisted at charity events. Such a generous soul. Poirot gazed at her steadily. Did he ever refuse you anything, madame? She blinked, startled. Refuse? Well, now that you mention it. Oui? Poirot leaned in. He declined to donate to a certain children's project Clara and I were organizing last month. I was surprised. He usually supported everything. Poirot's expression deepened. And did he explain why? Mrs. Pemberton hesitated. He said he needed to be careful with funds for a while. A murmur swept the room. Northcott shifted. Lady Honoria's eyes flicked sideways. Clara looked tense. Poirot absorbed each reaction. Poirot turned last to the young writer. Monsieur Warwick, you are pale. Warwick's voice cracked. It's just the shock. Poirot's tone was gentle but focused. Shock reveals truth, monsieur. Tell me, what was your relationship with Miles Redmayne? Warwick hesitated, glancing around. I hardly knew him. Hardly? Poirot pressed softly. Yet earlier, Miss Wren mentioned seeing Miles upset at a previous event. Did you observe the same? Warwick swallowed hard. I might have. He seemed troubled sometimes. I didn't pry. Poirot watched him closely. Writers are observers of human emotion. You see more than others. Warwick looked down. Perhaps. But tonight I saw nothing. Poirot believed he was lying. Poirot stepped back, having gathered his first impressions. The room seemed to exhale. He addressed both Furnival and Clara. We have before us 6 suspects, all with opportunities, some with tensions, and one perhaps with a secret tied tightly to the past. Clara whispered. But who among them would kill Miles? Poirot's eyes glinted. Ah, madame. Motive is like the ribbon on a Christmas parcel. It must be untied gently, thread by thread. But one thing is already clear. He turned slowly toward the grand Christmas tree. The killer did not choose the stocking at random. It is a message, personal, emotional, intimate. It speaks not of hatred alone, but of wounded sentiment. Perhaps even betrayal. Poirot stepped closer to the fire. And the missing parcel, Miles's charity gift, is the first thread of truth we must follow. Inspector Furnival frowned. Because it contains a clue? Poirot's mustache twitched. Non, mon ami, because it contains the reason he died. The room froze. Poirot looked at the guests with piercing clarity. And someone here knows exactly what was inside that missing gift. The hours slipped past midnight, and yet the Redmayne estate thrummed with tension as though the very walls held their breath. Snow piled against the windows, muffling the wind outside, creating a chilling silence that settled over the house like a shroud. Inspector Furnival stood before the drawing-room hearth, emboldened by what he believed was the first major break in the case. "Ladies and gentlemen," he declared with sudden authority, "I believe we have found our culprit." A ripple ran through the room. Poirot glanced up from his quiet contemplation by the Christmas tree, one eyebrow arched with polite curiosity rather than surprise. "And who, Inspector," he asked gently, "has caught your professional eye?" Furnival gestured sharply toward Simon Warwick, the young writer. "Him." Gasps flared like sparks among the guests. Warwick's face drained of all color. "Me?" he stammered. "I've done nothing." Inspector Furnival held up a folded paper sealed in a protective sleeve. "This was found in the hallway near the dining corridor, crumpled as though it had been hastily discarded. It is a letter addressed to Miles Redmayne, in your handwriting." All eyes swung to Warwick. His trembling hands gave him away before he spoke. It's not what you think." Poirot stepped closer, examining the constable's find with mild interest. "Inspector, may I see?" Furnival handed over the letter. Poirot studied it delicately between gloved fingers, his eyes scanning not just the words, but the manner of their formation, hesitations in the strokes, pressure in the ink, inconsistencies in slant. He said nothing yet. The inspector spoke loudly, for the benefit of all. "The letter reads, 'Miles, we must speak tonight. You cannot keep avoiding this. You know what you owe me. If you do not meet me, I shall be forced to act.'" The room erupted into horrified whispers. Lady Honoria glared at Warwick with icy disdain. How utterly disgraceful. Northcott folded his arms smugly. Threatening a man for money, hardly subtle. Miss Wren looked near, fainting. Surely he wouldn't. Mrs. Pemberton sobbed anew. Warwick's voice cracked. "It wasn't a threat. I didn't mean—" Inspector Furnival cut him off. "You had motive, opportunity, and now a written ultimatum. The evidence is overwhelming." Poirot's mustache twitched as he closed the letter calmly. "Overwhelming? Perhaps. Convenient? Most certainly." Furnival bristled. "Poirot, the man is desperate, financially stressed, and the letter speaks of money owed. It is obvious." Poirot gave a small sigh. His tone was gentle, but it carried the edge of steel. "Inspector, murder is rarely obvious. That is its nature." He approached Simon Warwick. "Monsieur, tell us, did you write this letter?" Warwick hesitated, every eye fixed upon him. Shame flooded his features. "Yes," he whispered. "I did." The room gasped again. Poirot did not flinch. "And the nature of what Miles owed you?" Warwick swallowed hard. "It wasn't money. It was acknowledgement." Poirot's eyes glimmered. "Ah, please explain." Warwick's voice quivered, but there was truth in it. "I wrote a manuscript last year. A mystery novel. Miles promised he would show it to his publisher friend as a personal favor. He insisted it had promise. But after that, he ignored me, avoided me. Every time I raised the matter, he made excuses. It meant everything to me, and he simply didn't care. His voice cracked with a rawness that quieted even Lady Honoria's disdain. Poirot nodded thoughtfully. "So you pressed him?" "I did. I wrote that letter tonight because I wanted him to finally speak to me. But I never intended harm. It wasn't a threat, it was desperation." Inspector Furnival barked a humorless laugh. "Desperation often leads to violence." Poirot turned sharply, his eyes flashing. "Or to foolish words, Inspector, but there is no evidence that the letter led to murder. It proves only emotion, not guilt." He turned again to Warwick. "Did you meet Miles tonight?" Warwick shook his head vehemently. "No. I waited for him in the library for nearly 20 minutes. He never came. I left the note in the corridor where he'd passed by, but I became embarrassed, panicked, and I went to retrieve it. Perhaps I dropped it." Poirot studied his expression, the tremble in his jaw, the tension in his shoulders. "This man," Poirot announced softly, "is lying." A shocked murmur. Inspector Furnival's eyes gleamed triumphantly. "Aha! So he did meet Miles?" Poirot raised a finger sharply. "He lies, but not about murder. He lies because he feels shame." Poirot turned his attention back to the young writer. "Monsieur Warwick, you did not wait in the library. You went searching for Miles, did you not?" Warwick blinked, stunned. Yes, he admitted. "I was embarrassed after writing the letter. I wanted to apologize, but I couldn't find him." Poirot nodded gently. "Because he was already dead." A quiet horror rippled across the room. Poirot paced slowly by the fireplace. "Let us examine the facts. This letter is emotional, yes. It could suggest resentment, but—" He tapped the letter lightly. "It is written at least an hour before the murder. The ink is dry, the creases settled. It was not written in the heat of sudden rage." He straightened. "Secondly, Miles Redmayne died without a struggle. The stocking was inserted into his mouth after death. This indicates the killer intended symbolism, not a spontaneous attack. A man inflamed by emotional frustration does not commit so calculated a murder." Inspector Furnival frowned. Still, he had motive. Poirot's eyes sharpened. "Did he? The letter refers to something owed, but not money. A favor withheld is cause for bitterness, not murder." Poirot turned back to Warwick. "Tell me, monsieur, what was inside the charity parcel Miles prepared tonight?" Warwick blinked. I have no idea." Poirot smiled thinly. "Exactly. And yet I have the very strong feeling that someone in this room does know." He returned the incriminating letter to the inspector, who looked displeased at the diminishing neatness of his theory. Poirot addressed the group at large. "You see, mes amis, this evidence is too perfect, too pointed, too theatrical." He glanced at Lady Honoria, at Major Kerrigan, at Julian Northcott, at Miss Wren, at Mrs. Pemberton. Each froze beneath his unwavering stare. Poirot folded his hands neatly. "The murderer wishes us to look toward the young writer, a convenient scapegoat. Sensitive, emotional, easily flustered, one who already harbors regret." He paused. "And that, Inspector, is why he is innocent." Furnival exhaled sharply. "If he is innocent, Poirot, then who—" Poirot interrupted softly. "Someone planted that letter where it would be found. Someone who wishes the guilt to fall on Monsieur Warwick." He stepped back, eyes drifting once more to the tree, its ornaments glowing like silent witnesses. "Let us not forget," he said quietly, "the missing Christmas parcel. Until we uncover its contents and why Miles feared it, we remain blind to the heart of this crime." Poirot's voice dropped to a whisper. "And I do not enjoy blindness, mes amis." A knock echoed at the door. A constable stepped inside, breathless. "Inspector, we found something." Something you'll want to see." Poirot's eyes sharpened. "The game," he murmured, "advances." The constable's urgency broke through the thick tension of the drawing room. Inspector Furnival straightened, eager for something, anything that would validate his instinct for swift resolution. Poirot, however, merely adjusted a cufflink and followed with calm, unhurried steps. "Lead the way, if you please," Poirot said softly. The constable guided them down the dim corridor that led toward the Redmaynes' private study, a handsome oak door now standing ajar. The room beyond was lit only by the glow of a single desk lamp. Shadows stretched long and thin, clinging to the walls like dark fingers. Inside, the air felt colder, very cold. Poirot entered first, his senses sharpening instantly. Mon Dieu. Even he was momentarily still. On the polished wooden desk lay the missing Christmas parcel, Miles Redmayne's intended donation for the charity auction. Its paper was torn halfway open, revealing the corner of a small wooden box within. But it was not the parcel that commanded attention. It was the figure slumped beside the desk. Major Leonard Kerrigan, unconscious. Blood trickled from a shallow wound at his temple, stark against his graying hair. One hand still clutched the edge of the desk, as though he'd tried to steady himself before collapsing. Inspector Furnival gasped. "Good heavens, Kerrigan!" Poirot dropped to one knee, examining the major with practiced precision. "He lives," he murmured. "The wound is not deep. A blow delivered with enough force to stun, but not to kill." "An accident?" Furnival asked. Poirot shook his head slowly. No accident. The angle, the placement. It was struck from behind while he bent over the desk." "Why? And by whom?" Poirot's gaze drifted back to the half-open parcel. "That, Inspector," he whispered, "is the question." A constable brought smelling salts, and within minutes Major Kerrigan groaned awake, blinking in confusion. Where am I?" "In the study," Poirot said gently. "You were attacked. Please, Major, tell us what happened." Kerrigan sat upright with the stubborn dignity of a soldier who refused to appear weak. "I heard talk of the missing parcel. I thought perhaps Miles might have left it somewhere in this room." He swallowed, wincing. "I came to search." "Alone?" Furnival asked sharply. "Of course alone. I didn't think I'd be ambushed." Poirot steepled his fingers. "And the parcel? You opened it?" Kerrigan nodded reluctantly. "I'd only begun to tear the paper when something struck me. Hard. The room spun." Poirot looked toward the door. "And you saw no one?" "No one." Poirot's expression tightened. The blow had been delivered silently, swiftly, and with intention. He turned to the parcel. "Inspector, if you would." Furnival carefully unfolded the torn wrapping. Inside lay a small, hand-carved wooden box, ornate, old, and locked with a delicate brass clasp. "It looks valuable," Furnival muttered. Poirot's eyes glimmered. "Valuable?" "Oui. But its value is not in gold or jewels. It is sentimental, personal." He lifted the box gently. "Something inside this container holds meaning. Meaning enough for a man to be killed and another attacked." Major Kerrigan scowled. But what could Miles possibly put in such a thing? Poirot did not answer. Instead, he studied the keyhole. Small, almost decorative. A special lock? Not easily forced. Furnival gestured toward the desk drawers. "We'll search for the key." Poirot raised a hand. "Non, the killer has it." The room chilled. The group reconvened before the fire. The atmosphere, already strained, now crackled with fear. 2 attacks in one night. Only one had succeeded, but both were surgical, purposeful. Poirot placed the wooden box carefully on the central tea table. "Let us summarize," he began, his voice low but resonant. "First, Miles Redmayne is murdered. A Christmas stocking forced into his mouth. a gesture intimate and symbolic. Second, his charity parcel is found hidden, unopened. Third, Major Kerrigan is attacked while attempting to reveal its contents. And fourth, he tapped the top of the box lightly. This remains locked. Lady Honorius sniffed indignantly. This has all gone far enough. Surely you can deduce who is responsible now, Monsieur Poirot. Poirot regarded her with serene patience. On the contrary, madame, the criminal grows bolder, more desperate, and desperate criminals make mistakes. He turned to Clara Redmayne. Madame, what do you know of this box? Clara looked at it in surprise. I don't recognize it. Miles did not mention it to me. Poirot observed the flicker in her eyes. Not deceit, but something like dawning fear. Mrs. Pemberton wrung her hands. Perhaps it was a private keepsake? Something of sentimental value? Northcott scoffed. Or something illicit. Poirot turned sharply. Your eagerness to suggest impropriety is noted, Monsieur Northcott. The financier stiffened. Poirot moved on. Simon Warwick, you said earlier you knew nothing of the parcel. Is that true? Yes, Warwick whispered. And you, Miss Wren? I didn't know he brought a gift at all. Poirot nodded. Then he turned to Major Kerrigan. Major, why did you come here alone? Kerrigan bristled. Because the parcel might contain evidence. Evidence you feared someone else might destroy? Poirot asked gently. Kerrigan faltered. I thought if I could find something, it might help. Poirot regarded him steadily. Or incriminate. The Major's eyes hardened. Are you accusing me? Poirot held up a calming hand. Accusing? No. Merely observing. A dangerous silence stretched through the room. Poirot lifted the wooden box once more. There is something inside that someone does not wish us to see. That is why Miles died, and that is why the Major was struck. Whoever attacked him tried to open this box. He lowered his voice. And failed. Furnival frowned. Why not simply steal it? Poirot's expression sharpened. Because the killer was interrupted, or feared making noise, or... He tapped the brass clasp. The lock was unfamiliar. Time was short. He surveyed every face. One of you knows what is inside, and one of you fears its discovery above all else. Miss Wren swallowed hard. Mrs. Pemberton trembled. Northcott avoided Poirot's gaze. Lady Honoria clenched her jaw. Kerrigan seethed silently. Warwick looked trapped in a nightmare. Poirot set the box down again. And until this box is opened, we walk in darkness. Clara's voice broke through the tension, frail and frightened. Poirot, will the killer strike again? Poirot looked at the fire, its flames flickering like warning signals. Yes, he said softly. A murderer who fails twice will not hesitate a third time. A hush fell. Poirot straightened, his eyes bright with a terrible calm. And mark my words, mes amis. Before this night is done, the killer will attempt something far more dangerous than a single blur. The clock chimed 1. Somewhere in the house, a floorboard creaked, and the shadows shifted, quiet, watchful, waiting. The Redmayne estate had grown eerily still. The house, once alive with laughter and the sparkle of Christmas cheer, now resembled a stage where every character behaved with brittle caution, as though aware that the great Hercule Poirot was watching, listening, thinking. Poirot stood by the fire, his silhouette outlined in warm light, yet his expression remained cool, sharp. The wooden box sat on the table like a serpent coiled and waiting. The locked clasp glinted. Poirot tapped the lid gently. A murderer, he said softly, often reveals himself not in what he hides, but in how he reacts to what might be revealed. Inspector Furnival muttered, "You're playing mind games, Poirot." Poirot smiled faintly. "Mais oui, Inspector, but murder is a game of the mind, and tonight we must invite our killer to make a mistake." He turned to the group. Let us continue our conversation with a slight change of atmosphere. Poirot pulled up a chair. The gesture was simple, but it carried an unspoken command. Please, each of you, come closer. The guests reluctantly gathered near the fire, forming a tense semicircle around the detective. The flames cast restless shadows on their faces. Poirot began with her, as he always began, with the strongest armor. "Lady Honoria," he said smoothly, "tell me, why did you look so startled when Mrs. Pemberton mentioned the financial hesitation of Miles Redmayne?" Her eyes flashed. "Startled? I was merely surprised. Nothing more." "Surprise," Poirot mused, "is the reaction of one who knows a detail they did not expect to hear aloud. You see, madame, concern for funds implies a certain strain." Honoria folded her arms tightly. "Financial matters are tiresome. I barely listened." Poirot leaned forward slightly. "And yet you listened enough to react visibly." Her jaw tightened. "You are twisting my words." Poirot nodded politely. "Perhaps." But her irritation, sharp, defensive, too quick, did not go unnoticed. Poirot turned gracefully. "Major Kerrigan, earlier you said you came to the study because you believed the parcel might contain evidence." "Evidence of what, exactly?" Kerrigan stiffened. "Of something suspicious. Miles himself behaved oddly during the party." "Oddly," Poirot repeated lightly. "Yet earlier you said he was merely undirected, but courteous." Kerrigan's eyes narrowed, a small tremor of discomfort. "I only meant that. Tonight he seemed preoccupied." Poirot's gaze sharpened, "Which is interesting because you claim to have hardly spoken to him tonight." "I observed him from afar," Kerrigan countered quickly. Poirot smiled gently. "You are a military man, Major. Observant, disciplined, and I suspect very aware of danger." "But I saw nothing," Kerrigan insisted. Poirot's voice softened dangerously. "Or perhaps you saw too much." Kerrigan's nostrils flared. The room tightened in collective suspicion. Poirot's gaze drifted to the financier. "Mr. Northcott, money is, your bloodstream, is it not? I imagine you are very perceptive when financial strains emerge." Northcott smoothed his lapel. "Naturally. But Miles's finances were none of my concern." "No? And yet you spoke with him often." Northcott hesitated a beat too long. "Socially, yes." Poirot tilted his head. "Socially or professionally?" Northcott gave a slight smile. "If you're asking whether I lent him money, no, I did not." Poirot did not look convinced. "Yet when we found the parcel, you were the first to say, 'valuable.' Curious for a man unfamiliar with its contents." Northcott's jaw moved once tightly. "I simply assumed." "Ah," Poirot replied softly. "Assumption, or memory?" Northcott's face hardened. "You're implying something without evidence." "No, monsieur," Poirot corrected gently. "I am watching how you deny it." Northcott turned rigid, the faint pulse at his temple quickening. Poirot shifted his warm tone toward the timid schoolmistress. "Mademoiselle Wren, forgive me, but your fear tonight is greater than the situation alone might justify. You tremble when I mention the box, and earlier you spoke of Miles appearing troubled at a previous gathering." Miss Wren clasped her hands tightly. "I am frightened, yes, but who would not be?" Poirot studied her for a long moment. "You are frightened of someone in this room." Her lips parted slightly. Poirot continued softly, "Fear can be a sign of innocence, but it can also be the fear of what comes next, if truth emerges." I don't know anything," she whispered. But her voice trembled with a different kind of fear, the fear of memory. Lastly, Poirot turned to Mrs. Pemberton. "Madame, earlier, when we discussed the charity project that Miles refused to support, you said he was always generous with such things, yet the others here knew nothing of his supposed financial trouble." Mrs. Pemberton blinked rapidly. Perhaps he simply confided in me. Perhaps. But he did not confide in his own sister. Why you, madame? I don't know. He may have thought I would understand. Poirot raised a brow. Did you understand? Why he could not spare funds? Mrs. Pemberton faltered. Her lips quivered. Poirot watched her gently. You know more than you admit. Something that frightened you. Or disappointed you. I only know he was troubled, she whispered. But I didn't ask why. Poirot nodded slowly. And yet, madame, sometimes what we do not ask is the loudest clue of all. Mrs. Pemberton's hands shook. Poirot stood and walked toward the Christmas tree. The ornaments glittered like frozen tears. The lights flickered. Murder, Poirot said thoughtfully, is born of emotion, rage, fear, envy, shame. Love turned sour, or betrayal resurfacing. He glanced at the wooden box. And this object, this quiet little box, it holds the emotion at the heart of this crime. Inspector Furnival leaned forward. Then we must open it. Poirot lifted the box gently. We will, but not yet. Not yet, Furnival exclaimed. Poirot, we need answers. Poirot looked at the inspector with utter calm. Non, mon ami. If we open it now, the murderer will have no reason to reveal themselves. He turned to the group, voice deceptively soft. So instead, we wait. A collective shudder passed through the room. Poirot clasped his hands behind his back. I shall now present each of you with a suspicion, a suggestion, a possibility. He proceeded slowly. To Lady Honoria, I suggest resentment. To Major Kerrigan, I suggest hidden knowledge. To Mr. Northcote, I suggest financial desperation. To Miss Wren, I suggest fear of truth. To Mrs. Pemberton, I suggest guilt of omission. And to Monsieur Warwick, Poirot paused, I suggest despair. The young writer shivered visibly. Poirot stepped back, letting the weight of his words settle like snow. Now, he said quietly, each of you knows exactly why you react as you do. And the murderer knows precisely what they fear I will uncover next. He looked at the wooden box, and that fear will drive them to act. The flames flickered. Footsteps creaked upstairs. A faint rustle echoed through the house. Poirot turned toward the sound. Inspector, he said softly, brace yourself. For tonight, the killer will not remain silent for long. The grandfather clock in the hallway struck 2, soft, deliberate chimes that seemed to echo like warnings. The guests, exhausted and shaken, had been gathered for hours under Poirot's relentless scrutiny. Shadows clung to the corners of the drawing room. The fire burned low. Poirot stood perfectly still near the center table, fingertips resting lightly on the locked wooden box. It was as though he expected it to vibrate, to whisper, to ache with secrets. His eyes were half-lidded but alert, always alert. Inspector Furnival paced the length of the room like an impatient hound. Poirot, we cannot keep them all here forever. The storm is worsening, roads are blocked, and unless you begin naming suspects, people will start to panic. Poirot smiled softly. Panic, Inspector, is a revealing emotion. It loosens tongues. No one has loosened anything tonight, Furnival muttered. Poirot's eyes twinkled. On the contrary, they have each loosened something, a contradiction, a tremor, a fear. He tapped the box lightly. And this. He did not finish. For at that moment, a sharp scream rang out from the upper floor. Every head jerked up. Poirot's eyes snapped open. Ah, the killer has grown impatient. Inspector Furnival shouted, Constables, upstairs, now! But Poirot was already moving. He walked swiftly toward the staircase with surprising agility, his coat swaying behind him like a dark banner. The guests followed at a hesitant distance, some trembling, others pale with dread. The scream had come from the east wing. The corridor there was narrow, lit only by the dim flickering of wall sconces. Poirot paused at the threshold, raising a hand for silence. He listened. A faint rustling, a soft whimper, the creak of a door, slowly swinging inward. They approached together. Poirot entered first. It was Miss Elspeth Wren's bedroom. The timid schoolmistress sat on the floor beside her writing desk, sobbing uncontrollably, her hands shaking so violently she could barely point. My drawer," she whispered. Someone went through my drawer." The desk had been rifled, papers scattered like fallen leaves. A notebook lay open, pages torn. Inspector Furnival frowned. "Miss Wren, did you scream because your desk was searched?" Miss Wren shook her head frantically. No, it's not that, it's—" She pointed behind the door. Everyone turned. Hanging from the hook on the back of the door was a Christmas stocking, a stocking identical to the one found in Miles Redmayne's mouth. The room erupted into gasps. Mrs. Pemberton nearly fainted. Simon Warwick stumbled backward, eyes wide in terror. Lady Honoria's hand flew to her chest. Northcott uttered a quiet curse. Miss Wren choked out the rest. It isn't mine." Poirot stepped forward, examining the stocking closely. Red yarn, snowflake pattern, childlike and cheerful. But inside, he slipped on gloves and reached into the stocking. His fingers closed around something cold. He withdrew a small brass key, the key to the wooden box. The room froze. Poirot held it aloft, turning slowly so everyone could see it glint in the lamplight. "So," he murmured, "our killer plants not evidence, but messages." Inspector Furnival leaned in. "Poirot, does this mean Miss Wren?" "No," Poirot said sharply. "This means the killer wishes us to believe Miss Wren is involved, as they wished us to believe in the guilt of young Warwick." His eyes swept the room. Again, the pattern emerges. The murderer plants incriminating objects where they will be discovered. They manipulate suspicion. They play a game of misdirection. He turned back to Miss Wren, whose face was wet with tears. "Mademoiselle, please, tell us everything." Miss Wren clutched her hands together. I came upstairs because I felt unwell. I was going to write a letter. When I entered, I heard someone leaving, running, but I didn't see them." Poirot nodded. "And this stocking was not here earlier?" "No, I would never own something so bright." Poirot gave the faintest smile. "Oui, your personality prefers muted green." A small murmur ran through the guests. Miss Wren looked startled that he had noticed such a detail, but this was Poirot. He noticed everything. Inspector Furnival exhaled harshly. "Well, we have the key now. Let's open the box." Poirot held the key delicately between his fingers, as though it were made of glass. His eyes grew distant, thoughtful. "Non," he said softly. Furnival nearly shouted. "Poirot!" Poirot turned, eyes blazing with certainty. "If we open the box prematurely, the murderer, who now realizes we possess the key, may resort to far more drastic measures to stop the truth from emerging." He placed the key gently in his pocket. "The box will be opened," he said, "but at the right moment, not a second before." Lady Honoria glared at him. "And in the meantime, what? We wait for another attack?" Poirot's gaze hardened. "We prevent one." He looked slowly at every face in the room. The killer is becoming desperate. Their misdirections grow bolder. Their risk-taking increases. They fear the contents of the box. They fear what we will learn. He turned to Inspector Furnival. "Inspector, no one goes anywhere alone. No guest steps out of sight, and the key stays with me." Furnival nodded reluctantly. "Very well." Then Poirot addressed the group again. "But one more thing is clear, mes amis." He lifted a finger. "This stocking was placed in Miss Wren's room not to frame her, but to frighten her." Miss Wren let out a small cry. Poirot kneeled beside her, his voice gentle. "Mademoiselle, someone wished to send you a warning." "A warning? she whispered. Yes, you know something, perhaps without realizing it. Something that threatens the killer. Miss Wren shook her head desperately. I don't know anything. Poirot's voice softened even further. But you do. You saw something, or heard something, something that seemed unimportant. Miss Wren stared at him with lips trembling. Poirot stood. I suggest, he said softly. We return to the drawing room. Our killer has shown their hand once more. He looked at the stocking. And each move they make brings them closer to their mistake. The guests, shaken and silent, followed Poirot and the inspector back downstairs. The storm continued to rage outside, sealing everyone within the house. Poirot paused at the top of the stairs, glancing behind him once. Someone was watching from the shadows of the upper hallway. He saw the faintest movement. Then the figure slipped away. The storm raged harder as the hour pushed past 2:30. The Redmayne estate groaned under the weight of winter wind, the windows rattling as though the house itself trembled at the secrets trapped within. Downstairs, the guests reassembled in the drawing room, some pale, some fuming, all exhausted. Poirot stood by the mantelpiece, hands resting lightly on the wooden box now placed in a position of prominence at the center table. He had the key. He had the box. He had the suspects. But still he waited. Inspector Furnival was pacing again, muttering under his breath. Poirot, you're toying with this. We must act before someone else gets hurt. Poirot turned slowly, his expression serene. Act, Inspector, but I am acting. Observation is action. Patience is action. Silence, when used correctly, is the most powerful action of all. Tell that to the man who struck Kerrigan, Furnival snapped. Poirot gave a light shrug. I intend to. Shortly. He faced the guests once more, clasping his hands together. Mes amis, he began softly. Tonight has revealed much. A second attack, a planted stocking, a key returned to us by a frightened criminal. Yet what matters most is not these... theatrics. He tapped his temple. It is the psychology. The guests stiffened. Poirot stepped toward the Christmas tree, studying the ornaments with unusual intensity. You see, he continued, murderers often make mistakes when emotions run high. Tonight, just now, we saw the killer in a moment of impulse. That stocking in Miss Wren's room. That was not planned. That was fear. He paused, turning back toward them. And fear, like murder, leaves a fingerprint in the mind. Poirot began moving about the room, touching no object, disturbing nothing. He merely observed. The chairs, the glasses, the carpet, the arrangement of boots drying by the fire, the droplets of melted snow at the door where someone had come in from outside and shaken off their coat earlier. He noticed everything. Poirot stopped beside a small silver tray on a sideboard, a tray that held 5 used glasses, not 6. He spoke quietly. When we first gathered here after Miles's death, there were 6 of you, 6 guests, yet this tray holds only 5 glasses. Lady Honoria frowned. Perhaps one was taken away. Poirot shook his head. No. This tray was carried from the dining room directly after the scream. Only 6 guests had been served champagne before the shock stopped the service. Nervous glances flicked around. Poirot's eyes narrowed. One of you did not drink. He looked at each face, lingering just long enough to make hearts jump. Mrs. Pemberton squeaked. I didn't drink. I prefer warm cider. Poirot nodded graciously. Correct, and yours is the missing glass, for you took it with you when speaking with Clara. But there is another. He lifted one glass from the tray and held it delicately. This one has lipstick. Lady Honoria stiffened. That is mine. Poirot set it down and picked up another. This one has fingerprints of a man who handles paper often, ink on the pads. Monsieur Warwick. Warwick nodded timidly. Poirot moved to the next, a heavy smudge. This, a military grip. Major Kerrigan. He moved through them with graceful precision. And this one, fingerprints faint but manicured. Monsieur Northcote. Poirot set down the last glass. Which leaves a missing drink. Miss Wren gasped. But I did drink mine. Poirot smiled kindly. I know, yours is there. He tapped the glass with a faint fingerprint and a trace of perfume. Very distinctive. The room chilled. Poirot picked up the only glass left unassigned. This one, he said softly, belongs to no one. Inspector Furnival frowned. You mean someone else drank from it? Poirot's eyes twinkled. Or someone pretended to. He turned to Clara Redmayne. Madame, you were the hostess. Did you drink tonight? Clara blinked. No, I didn't have a chance. I was greeting guests and arranging the auction table. Poirot's smile widened. Then this empty glass, this unclaimed glass, belongs to you? The guests gasped. Clara's face paled. Monsieur Poirot, what does that mean? Poirot's tone remained gentle. It means that in the first gathering, someone took a glass meant for you and placed it on the tray to hide their absence. Inspector Furnival inhaled sharply. You mean one of the guests slipped away before the scream? Exactement. Poirot tapped the empty glass lightly. The killer, at the time of the murder, was not in the drawing room at all. The room erupted. Lady Honoria snapped, This is preposterous. Major Kerrigan growled, Then who was missing? Poirot raised his hand for silence. One of you, in the moments before Miles was killed, quietly left the gathering. You took a drink meant for Madame Redmayne, placed it on the tray to mask your absence, and you slipped away. Poirot's eyes sharpened like blades, and only one of you had the opportunity to do so unseen. Poirot paced before each suspect slowly, as though listening to some private rhythm in the air. Lady Honoria, he murmured, you remained near the conservatory with Mr. Northcote. Many saw you. She nodded stiffly. Major Kerrigan, Poirot continued, you stood at the mantel with Monsieur Warwick. Several guests observed your heated discussion. The Major grunted. Simon Warwick and Miss Wren both wandered briefly, yes, but not long enough to commit murder. Their movements were easily traced by others. Poirot turned suddenly. Mr. Northcote. Northcote blinked in feigned confusion. You, monsieur, stood closest to the hallway leading to the dining corridor. When Miles walked past, you saw him. But you were left alone for several minutes afterward while Lady Honoria fetched her shawl. Honoria stiffened. I did fetch my shawl. Poirot's voice turned very soft, and in those minutes, Monsieur Northcote could have followed Miles. A murmur rippled. Northcote lifted his chin. This is absurd. I never left the conservatory. Poirot's eyes glittered, but the empty glass says otherwise. Northcote swallowed. Poirot leaned slightly forward. And so does your coat. Northcote froze. Poirot gestured subtly. Your coat is damp, monsieur, more damp than the others by the fire. Meaning you put it on recently. A beat of deafening silence. Poirot pressed. The killer stepped outside after the murder to dispose of something. Perhaps bloodied gloves. Perhaps another stocking. Perhaps to gather their composure. Northcote's eyes flickered, then hardened. But Poirot lifted a finger. No, not yet. The solution, it waits. Inspector Furnival sputtered. Poirot, you can't keep doing this. What is the clue? What have you deduced? Poirot gave a sly, gentle smile. The clue, Inspector, is something so delicate, so small, that none of you noticed it, but I did. He placed the glass back on the tray. And when combined with what lies inside this wooden box, he patted it lightly. We shall have our truth, Clara whispered, trembling. Poirot, you know who killed my brother? Poirot turned, eyes glowing with certainty. "Oh yes, madame, I know." A sharp gust of wind slammed into the house, rattling the windows. Poirot continued, "But before I speak, we shall gather once more, all of us, in the drawing-room in 1 hour." "Why 1 hour?" Furnival demanded. Poirot's eyes narrowed. "Because the killer will act again." Snow slammed against the windows with a fury that seemed almost intentional, as though nature itself sought to imprison the killer with the rest of them. The storm howled, the walls creaked, the house, sealed by ice, darkness, and fear, felt like a giant locked room. Poirot gave each guest one instruction before the hour began. "You may rest, you may pace, you may reflect, but you must not leave the drawing-room, not for a moment." Inspector Furnival stationed constables at every threshold, their silhouettes rigid against the dim corridor lights. Poirot sat alone by the fire, his hands steepled beneath his chin, eyes closed, not in rest, but in fierce concentration. Every detail of the night swirled through his mind. The missing glass, the stocking, the wooden box, the planted evidence, the emotional tremors, the contradictions. The killer was unraveling. Now, he needed only to wait. The guests shifted uneasily in their seats, watching Poirot as though expecting him to suddenly leap and name the murderer. No one dared speak for a long while. Finally, Lady Honoria broke the silence. "This is intolerable," she snapped. "We sit here like prisoners while you play your little puzzle." Poirot opened one eye. "Patience, madame. The truth requires room to breathe." She huffed, folding her arms. Major Kerrigan stared into the fire as though it were a battlefield, his jaw grinding. Simon Warwick scribbled frantically in a notebook. Thoughts, fragments, fears. Mrs. Pemberton sniffled into a lace handkerchief, eyes darting nervously from face to face. Miss Wren clutched her knees, trembling. And Julian Northcote. He sat perfectly still. Too still. Poirot noticed. Poirot rose suddenly, the wooden box in hand. Every head turned sharply toward him. "Mes amis," he said softly, "let us consider this box once more. It is small, it is personal, it is locked, and the key," he tapped his pocket, "was planted in the room of Miss Wren." Miss Wren flinched. Poirot continued, "The killer feared what lay within. That much is certain. Therefore, what do we deduce?" No one answered. Poirot explained, "A killer fears what can incriminate, but they fear even more what can reveal motive." Northcote's fingers twitched. Poirot noticed. He set the box gently on the center table. "Tell me, Madame Redmayne, did Miles ever speak of secrets? Of hidden burdens?" Clara's eyes filled with tears. "Only once. He said there were things he wished to share but couldn't yet. Things about our family." Poirot nodded slowly. "Family secrets are the sharpest knives." Lady Honoria scoffed. "So you believe this box contains some scandal?" Poirot smiled faintly. "Not scandal, madame. Truth. A private truth belonging to Miles and dangerous to someone in this room." Poirot stepped forward, addressing the group. "We have in this room 6 suspects. Allow me to speak of motive." He turned toward each in turn. To Lady Honoria, "You have your reputation, calculated, polished. Any public scandal, any familial tie, any impropriety connected to Miles might ruin you. You fear exposure." Honoria bristled. "That is absurd." Poirot continued. To Major Kerrigan, "You spoke often of discipline, order, yet you were the only one bold enough to go to the study alone. Why? Because you feared what others might find first." Kerrigan snarled. "If I feared anything, it was mismanagement of evidence." Poirot raised a brow. "But you were struck, and the blow suggests the attacker knew you were getting close." Kerrigan fell silent. To Mrs. Pemberton, "You admitted Miles was struggling financially. How did you know, unless he sought funds from you?" Mrs. Pemberton squeezed her handkerchief. I cannot say." Poirot's voice softened. "But you can, and you will. Next, Simon Warwick. You are emotional, sensitive, easily inflamed. Your letter showed desperation, but not murderous intent. You are ruled by your heart, not calculation." Warwick swallowed, relief and fear mixing. Poirot turned to Miss Wren. "You fear someone here. That fear tells me something essential. You are innocent. The guilty fear Poirot. The innocent fear the guilty." Miss Wren nodded shakily. Finally, Poirot faced Julian Northcote. A hush fell. Northcote tried to hold his composure, but Poirot saw the faint pulse quickening at his neck. "Monsieur Northcote," Poirot said gently, "you denied financial dealings with Miles. Yet your discomfort when we discussed money betrayed you. You denied leaving the conservatory, yet your damp coat betrayed you." Northcote opened his mouth. "Poirot, listen." Poirot raised a hand. "I am not finished." Northcote's face hardened. "We have here a murderer who plants evidence, a murderer who struck Kerrigan from behind, a murderer who fears the contents of the box, a murderer who slipped from the drawing room, hid the missing gift, and returned before anyone noticed." Poirot stepped closer. "A murderer who knows how to control appearances." Northcote's breathing quickened. Lady Honoria whispered, "Poirot, are you saying—" Poirot held up a finger. "No, madame, I'm saying nothing yet." He turned back to the group. "For now, I simply ask each of you to consider your own motives, your fears, your secrets." He tapped the wooden box. "For in less than 1 hour, all shall be revealed." A loud knock jolted the room. Constable Briggs entered, pale. "Inspector, we found the side door open. Someone tried to leave the house." Poirot's eyes glinted. "As I expected." Furnival snapped, "Who was it?" Briggs swallowed. "Hard to say. Snow footprints were scattered, but someone attempted escape." Poirot faced the room. "And who," he asked softly, "would attempt escape now, unless they knew what was about to be revealed?" Silence fell like a hammer. Poirot took a deep breath. "It is time, mes amis. Gather yourselves. Arrange your thoughts. For at 3 o'clock precisely, I shall open this box." He tapped it once, gently. "And then, with all suspects present, I shall reveal the murderer." Every face blanched. Poirot walked to the window, pulling the curtain slightly aside. Snow swirled violently outside. "Trapped, like the killer," he murmured to himself. "Courage, mon ami Miles. Your truth will live again." The grandfather clock struck 3. Not loudly, not violently, but with a slow, resonant solemnity, as though marking the moment destiny stepped into the room. All guests were gathered once more in the drawing room. The storm outside roared like a trapped beast. Inside, a silence so sharp hung in the air it seemed to cut the breath. Poirot stood before the fire. The wooden box sat at the center. Table. The brass key lay between his fingers. Inspector Furnival watched with impatience. The guests watched with dread. Poirot spoke softly. "Mes amis, the hour has come." He inserted the key, turned it. The lock clicked, a small, delicate sound, yet one that seemed to echo through the very foundations of the house. Poirot lifted the lid. Inside the box lay a bundle of old letters tied with red ribbon, a tiny silver locket, and a torn birth certificate. A collective gasp filled the room. Poirot lifted the certificate first. "It is as I suspected," he said. "Miles Redmayne was not merely Clara's younger brother. He was also, how shall we say, someone's secret." Clara covered her mouth. "Secret." Poirot nodded gently. "This is a birth certificate for a child born 28 years ago. The name of the mother is Annabelle Warwick." Simon Warwick's breath caught. He stared at Poirot as though struck. Poirot continued, "The father's name is absent, but the child, Miles, was adopted into the Redmayne family shortly after birth." Shock rippled through every corner of the room. Simon whispered, horrified, "My mother? She never told me." Poirot turned to him with sympathy. "Because she was told not to. The Redmayne family, wishing to spare themselves scandal, arranged for secrecy. They provided your mother with financial assistance on the condition of silence." Simon shook his head slowly. The truth broke over him in waves. So Miles was my brother. Poirot nodded, but that was not the only secret. He held up the locket, inside a tiny photograph of Annabelle holding a baby. Miles. Next came the letters, each written in fluctuating handwriting, all addressed to Clara's father, pleading for help, for support, for mercy. Poirot laid the locket down and faced the guests. "Now that you see the contents of the box, I shall explain the crime in full." Poirot's voice steadied, rhythmic, precise. Miles discovered the truth months ago. He found these letters hidden away in one of his adoptive father's old trunks. This revelation shook him deeply. He felt betrayed, confused, but more importantly, Poirot glanced at Julian Northcott. He discovered that someone else already knew this secret and had used it. Northcott's face drained of color. Poirot continued, "Mr. Northcott is a financier, a smooth talker, a man skilled in exploiting vulnerabilities. When Miles confided in him, foolishly hoping for advice, Northcott realized the power this truth held. Northcott's lips tightened. He began to blackmail Miles Redmayne, quietly, subtly, demanding money in exchange for his silence." Poirot stepped forward, eyes burning. "You, Mr. Northcott, had access to Miles's confidences. You knew of the locket, the letters, the certificate, and you made demands so steep that Miles, who was generous but financially irresponsible, began to crumble." Mrs. Pemberton gasped. "So that's why he refused the charity donation?" Poirot nodded. "Oui. He was secretly paying off Northcott." Poirot lifted the glass tray from earlier. "And when I noticed the missing glass, monsieur, I knew you had been absent at the critical moment." Lady Honoria stared in horror. "Julian, is this true?" Northcott's eyes flickered, but he said nothing. Poirot pressed on. "Tonight, Miles confronted you. He told you he intended to reveal the truth to his sister, to end your hold over him. This would have ruined you financially and socially. You could not allow it." Poirot paused. "So you followed him?" Poirot recreated the scene, his voice soft, hypnotic. "Miles left the drawing room to fetch the charity parcel. You slipped away seconds later, placing a decoy glass on the tray to hide your disappearance. You followed him down the corridor." Poirot mimed the movements as though directing a silent play. "You confronted him. He refused to be manipulated any further. Perhaps he pushed past you. Perhaps he threatened to expose you. In panic or fury, you seized the nearest object." Poirot gestured toward the tree. "A Christmas stocking, a symbol of innocence. You stuffed it into his mouth post-mortem, crafting a grotesque metaphor. Your childish cruelty." Northcott's jaw twitched. Poirot continued. "You then hid the parcel in the study. Later, when you realized the box was inside, you returned to destroy the contents, but Major Kerrigan interrupted you, so you struck him from behind and fled." The Major stiffened but said nothing. Poirot lifted the final piece. "And when you feared Miss Wren had seen you leaving the study, you planted a stocking in her room to terrify her into silence." Miss Wren burst into tears. I only heard footsteps. I didn't see a face." Poirot nodded warmly. "I know, mademoiselle." Then he turned, slowly toward Northcott. "Monsieur, there's only one thing left to say." Northcott snapped. "You can't prove any of this." Poirot smiled sadly. "But I can." He reached into the wooden box one last time and lifted a final letter, a newer letter, Miles's handwriting. The room froze. Poirot read aloud. "If anything happens to me, Look to Julian Northcott. He knows the truth of my birth and has much to lose. Silence. Then, Northcott lurched to his feet. Lies! Constables seized him instantly. He struggled, wild-eyed, desperate. Poirot watched with infinite calm. It is over, monsieur. You played your game very cleverly, but you forgot. Poirot does not follow the evidence. Poirot follows the human heart. Northcott sagged as though struck. His fight drained. His mask collapsed. He whispered, broken. He should have just kept quiet. Poirot closed the box. It is not in the nature of truth to remain silent. Northcott was cuffed and escorted away. Major Kerrigan exhaled deeply. Lady Honoria leaned heavily on a chair. Mrs. Pemberton wept openly. Miss Wren trembled with relief. Simon Warwick stared at the birth certificate, processing the truth about his brother. Clara Redmayne approached Poirot, tears brimming. You saved us. You saved Miles's memory. Poirot bowed his head. Non, madame. I only revealed what he already knew in his heart. She embraced him briefly, grief and gratitude mingling. As dawn broke faintly through the thinning storm, Poirot prepared to leave. He stood at the door, coat immaculate despite the long night. Inspector Furnival approached him. Poirot, you never cease to astound. Poirot smiled. It is not I who astounds, Inspector. It is human nature, complex, tragic, and infinitely foolish. He stepped outside into the snow, and now I shall return to my warm bed and my hot chocolate. Poirot paused, looking up at the pale morning sky. Murderers, Inspector, are very tiring. With that, Hercule Poirot walked into the snowy dawn, his little grey cells content, justice served, and the truth wrapped neatly like a Christmas parcel finally opened.